Hundreds of thousands march against Monsanto across the globe. Why does one US company generate so much ire, and do American lawmakers go out of their way to promote its interests? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihan Britansi. On Saturday, in scenes reminiscent of the protests against US-led wars in Vietnam in the 1960s and Iraq in 2003, protesters took to the streets in 436 cities in 52 countries to march against Monsanto. The US food giant has become the focal point of a global campaign against producers of genetically modified organisms. Proponents contend that plants grown from GMO seeds allow farmers to grow more food using less resources. Those who took to the streets argue that the science underpinning GMOs, though, is untested at best and harmful at worst. In addition, that it's unwise to allow a few huge corporations to have such control over the Earth's food supply. In Washington, companies including Monsanto have successfully lobbied politicians to insert protections for their business interests, sometimes deep in the small print of unrelated legislation. Next week, however, the Farm Bill is due to be considered in the Senate, and it appears it may prove to be an important battleground in the debate over GMOs. Nick Burnaby is Director of Social Media for the March Against Monsanto. I asked him what that campaign was trying to achieve.
Well, basically what we want to do is kickstart the food revolution. We want to bring awareness to the effects of GMOs and what they're causing to people's health. There's a few recent independent studies that showed that rats that were fed GMO corn were developing cancer and tumors. There's also a new study that shows that hamsters, after a few generations of being fed GMOs, become infertile. Another thing we want to do is also bring about awareness to the new techniques to decentralizing the food supply, such as aquaponics, vertical gardening, indoor gardening, and things like that. So we really want to hit Monsanto and these big companies that are trying to take over not only the food supply, but also the government. We want to hit them from every angle. So we want to hit them in the pocketbook. We want to hit them politically. We want to give people alternatives to these products and talk about ways that we could create solutions.
So this isn't just about labeling, then?
No, this definitely isn't just about labeling. This is about a lot more than just labeling. I mean, a lot of countries all over the world have already banned GMOs. The problem in the United States is that Monsanto has become so involved in the government. They have the head of the FDA is a former Monsanto employee. They have the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. He's a former Monsanto attorney. So it's going to be pretty hard to get them politically in the United States. But what we want to get is a market rejection, a grassroots awareness campaign where people can start growing their own food. And there's so many new techniques that we can bring about, and a lot of people don't know about. And these new techniques are what is going to revolutionize the food supply and start to help feed the world and feed all the poor people that are struggling to eat right now. And Monsanto claims that they're the company that's going to go in and save all these people, but the problem is that a lot of their products are actually harming these people and causing people to actually commit suicide in India because they were promised a crop that was going to do a certain thing, and that crop never came through with what they were promised.
So supporters of GMO foods will say, look, clearly there might be some uncertainty about the science. That research is still underway. But in the end, campaigners against GMOs are simply anti-science. There isn't the evidence of harm to humans or to bees. There is uncertainty, perhaps, at the most. But in the end, this is actually simply an anti-scientific advancement movement that you're part of.
No, actually, the problem with a lot of the mainstream scientific studies is that they're funded by the same companies like Monsanto. So you have a conflict of interest there with these scientific studies. You're having them funded by Monsanto, and so these studies don't want to show a bad light on Monsanto because they would lose their funding. A lot of the independent studies that are just coming out, there's a lot coming out of Europe, official studies out of France and Russia that are talking about the real effects of these GMOs, and there's some real scientific evidence of the harm that they're causing. The problem in the United States is that Monsanto is only required to test their product for 90 days, but a lot of these problems don't come up in the first 90 days. They come up over generations, and they come up over years and years of exposure to all these pesticides and these chemicals that are being produced within the plants now that kill off insects and things like that. But these chemicals can build up in your body and have the same effects on humans that they're being shown to have on animals.
You've had enormous success then over the weekend in mobilizing people, and these issues have been around for decades now. People trying to draw attention to farmers in India, the lack of research into the long-term effects of GMOs. What do you think is making the difference now?
Well, you know, there's a lot of reasons why, like this independent research that's coming out. One of the big things that raises a lot of questions is the recent passing of the Monsanto Protection Act back in March. We found out about it in the alternative media community back in December, and we put together a couple campaigns. We tried to stop it in the Congress. We tried to stop it at the House. We tried to stop it at the Senate. We had a petition with 250,000 signatures that we sent to Obama, but Obama still signed it into law. Now, the thing about the Monsanto Protection Act, which is scary, is it really puts Monsanto and other biotech giants above the law. It makes them immune to federal lawsuits. So if there was, if an official research paper came out that showed that these companies were causing cancer, we couldn't even sue them to take them out of the marketplace. So that's a huge question that we have, is if Monsanto is so confident in their product and if they are what they say they are, why is it that they need the Monsanto Protection Act to keep them protected from lawsuits that are likely to come about in the near future?
Nick Burnaby, thank you very much. I'm joined from Austin, Texas by Tom Philpott. He's co-founder of Maverick Farms, a center for sustainable food education in North Carolina. He also writes for Mother Jones magazine. Christopher Cook is in San Francisco. He's author of Diet for a Dead Planet, Big Business and the Coming Food Crisis. And here in the studio, Ryan Grimm, Washington bureau chief for the Huffington Post. We approached Monsanto to join us, but they declined. We also contacted a variety of agricultural industry trade bodies and scientific institutes funded by agribusiness to join us. They either declined or didn't get back to us. Tom Philpott, first of all, let's just deal with some breaking news we received a few hours ago. An announcement that a non-approved strain of genetically engineered wheat was found in an Oregon field, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture says it's the same strain tested by Monsanto a decade ago that was not approved. Monsanto stopped testing this strain in 2005, but this seems to be at the nub of some of this discussion. What are the implications of this?
Well, the implications are pretty murky right now. I mean, the thing about it is that a farmer in a field in Oregon, a wheat farmer, was applying Roundup to his field thinking he was going to kill off some wheat, and it didn't kill the wheat off. And so he had notified the authorities, and it turned out to be Roundup Ready, which is the sort of engineered to resist Monsanto's own herbicide Roundup. And the immediate problem, and why the USDA is so concerned, is that 90% of the wheat that's grown in Oregon is exported, and there is no nation on planet Earth that accepts GMO wheat. It's not approved anywhere, and so it could balloon into a trade issue. And so what the USDA is going to have to do now is ensure its trading partners that the U.S.'s trading partners that it's a sort of isolated one-off incident. But the question it raises is, how did this seed that they stopped testing in 2005 get into a field in 2013? Was it old seed sitting around that somehow got into a weed and seed a seed specialist in Oregon? Is it genetic contamination of the seed supply? All these questions are up in the air right now, but we have a potential trade crisis on our hands.
All right, and we'll leave those questions hanging for the moment as further investigations are done, but it's pretty interesting at this moment when there is this focus on Monsanto, and there are these fears apparently of hundreds of thousands of people around the world that there isn't enough control or oversight on genetically modified food. So Monsanto didn't agree to appear on our program, but we did get a response to the demonstrations on Saturday, and this is it. Monsanto is primarily a seed company. We sell seeds to farmers. The 21,000 people at Monsanto are proud of our efforts to help improve farm productivity and food quality. Agriculture and its uses are important to each of us. Among the challenges facing agriculture are producing food for our growing population and reducing agriculture's footprint on the environment. While we respect each individual's right to express their point of view on these topics, we believe we're making a contribution to improving agriculture by helping farmers produce more from their land while conserving natural resources such as water and energy. And that is usually the stock response one gets, Tom, from the GMO industry. Actually, on that claim about efficiency then and crop yields and using less pesticides, how are they doing, by the way?
They're doing pretty badly, actually. It's interesting that Roundup Ready wheat kind of got released in Oregon because throughout the Midwest and the South, where massive amounts of Roundup Ready corn, soy, and cotton are produced, the Roundup Ready technology is failing. Weeds are developing resistance to it, and farmers are responding by dumping more and more herbicides onto fields. And the other crop that Monsanto has managed to get into the supply is Bt corn. It's corn that's engineered to express the toxic gene that this bacterial pesticide, so that the corn has its own pesticide built into it. And predictably enough, after years and years of it expanding to the Midwest, it's now something like 80% of corn is Bt corn. Insects are developing resistance to it. And this year, well, it started in 2011, but accelerating in the 2013 growing season, farmers are already applying more and more insecticide before the crop is even planted because they're worried about resistance to this. So you've got this technology that is, in its own terms, failing. It's not reducing pesticide use at all. And to date, studies that we have on GMOs show that they have not increased yields significantly. In some situations, maybe marginally, but most of the crop yield improvements over the past 15 years have been from conventional plant breeding. GMOs have contributed very little.
All right, but you mentioned studies then. We heard Nick Burnaby of the Monsanto campaign that organised the protest there talk about studies as far as harm to rats and so forth. And this is where Monsanto would appear to have a point, though, that is there any definitive evidence showing harm to rats or anyone else, Frank? I mean, that French study he cited, for example, I mean, it was slammed, its methodology was slammed from some pretty eminent quarters. Isn't that the sort of thing, though, that perhaps gives those who say that opponents to GMOs are simply anti-science Luddites a certain, it gives them a platform, really?
Well, there are problems with that study, but one thing about it that doesn't get mentioned nearly enough is that the scientists who did it, they enacted it based on protocols from Monsanto. They used the same kind of rats, they used the same kind of feeding regime. And one of the knocks on it is that the rats that they used are susceptible to tumors and cancer, and that therefore there are these massive tumor bulges. But they got significant results even so. And what they did was they essentially extended the Monsanto test. They doubled the time frame of it. And so I think what it tells us is that we definitely need more independent research. I think maybe he overplayed the certainty of the study a little bit, your previous guest, but I think the test did establish the need for more research.
All right. Well, what was also clear from talking to Nick Burnaby Ryan, though, was this is more about some of those issues. It was also about the political coziness, as we have this uncertainty that drives legislation that doesn't seem to be factoring in that uncertainty, and specifically then the farmer assistance provision, what Nick and others widely called the Monsanto Protection Act, which was kind of smuggled into a budget deal. It was pretty surreptitious and murky. I mean, what's going on?
Sure. So they snuck it into a spending bill, and John Tester, senator from Montana, spoke out on the Senate floor before it passed, but nobody's on the Senate floor. So he spoke to an audience of none. Apparently nobody was watching on C-SPAN either. So it slipped through with very little public attention. Once people realized what had happened, there was an outcry. So Senator Jeff Merkley is now making an effort to repeal it, and he has a lot of kind of momentum behind him. But just last week, he tried to bring his amendment up, which is not germane to the Farm Bill, even though it involves farming. That's that's for Senate.
So let's just clarify that then. So the Farm Bill is coming up next week, and Merkley of Oregon, Democrat, says he will introduce an amendment.
Well, he tried last week,
and it didn't happen.
And Roy Blunt from the farming state of Missouri objected to it and argued that it's not fair to farmers who have bought this seed that we now have said is dangerous. Well, they've already paid for it, so you might as well let them plant it. That's the rationale.
Right. And then there were also attempted amendments in some legislation to get GMO labeling or give states the right to label.
It was a bad day all around. It's the same day that Roy Blunt blocked that measure. An overwhelming majority of senators rejected an amendment from Bernie Sanders that would simply have allowed states to allow labeling of products that have GMOs in it. That was too much. And it was beaten by Democrats and Republicans.
Christopher Cook, we have this Farm Bill then coming up, and we're going to go into it in a bit more detail now. But to what extent does that cozy relationship between agribusiness and politicians on Capitol Hill, to what extent has that shaped the direction of the Farm Bill over the last few months?
Oh, it's a very dominant factor, and not just this year, but in previous years as well. And you know, Monsanto is just the very glaring tip of the iceberg in terms of this corporate control that we see in the food supply and over seeds and pesticides, and then also in politics. You know, and so last year, agribusiness spent $137 million lobbying Congress, and those are well-spent dollars, clearly, when you see the dynamics and the priorities that come out of the Farm Bill. There are some good little pieces here and there, but the dominant themes reflect the interests of agribusiness and the large corporations and commodity groups that really run the show and give the money to lobbying and to politicians, and who have this phenomenal amount of control over, you know, Monsanto and just a couple other seed companies own most of the seeds across the planet and have just vast sums of money to spend in politics and law, as well as in the food supply.
So, Tom, as far as any hope that some might have had that, you know, that this amazing mobilization of the weekend coming before the Farm Bill was considered again and finally, I mean, is there any hope of any movement on either, you know, genetically modified food oversight or on any of these other issues, perhaps reining in the power of agribusiness, or is that pretty much over despite the hundreds of thousands on the streets?
I think that the Farm Bill, unfortunately, is pretty much of a done deal. I think the big debate of the Farm Bill right now is how much to cut food stamps.
Right.
That is where the debate is. Otherwise, Christopher is exactly right. The dominant effect of it is to sort of maintain the sort of maximum production of corn and soy. In terms of GMO regulation, though, there was a social movement victory about a month ago, and that is that there's a second generation of genetically modified crops that are engineered to withstand not just one but two herbicides. The idea is that since resistance to these herbicides is taking off among weeds, if we add another even more toxic herbicide to the mix, then we can control this resistance problem. And that's these companies sort of selling you the solution to the problem that they created. And it's such a bad idea. And even mainstream scientists at places like Penn State have stepped in and said, this is going to cause it's going to increase resistance. It's going to cause more herbicides to be used. It's going to cause more toxic herbicides to be used. And the USDA, which the USDA oversees the deregulation of GMO crops, it was widely expected to approve these crops in 2012. It didn't do it in 2012. Meanwhile, comments, its comment period was flooded with comments. Tens of thousands of people commented, including scientists. It was expected to approve these crops over Christmas break last year. It didn't do it. And just about a month ago, it stopped and said, we're not going to approve these crops until we've conducted a thorough environmental impact statement on them, which may be just a delay, but it's a delay of a whole nother year, meaning that we won't see them in the 2014 growing season and maybe never see them. And that is, I think, a direct consequence of people rising up getting in the streets like they did last weekend, but also, contacting the USDA, bombarding them with emails and things like that.
All right.
So that is, I see, as a social movement victory right there.
Well, look, there's another major plank of the Farm Bill, and of course it's called the Farm Bill, Ryan, but in fact, certainly this year's Farm Bill seems very much concerned with the social safety net in the US, and indeed how the poorest in society can eat. In fact, let's run through some of the proposals in this Farm Bill. Many of the cuts projected that are contained within this relate to what are called food stamps, what are known as food stamps, SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. More than half of the cuts projected by the Republican-controlled House over the next 10 years come from SNAP in this Farm Bill. That's $20.5 billion, while the Democratic majority Senate has proposed cutting over $4 billion from the food stamp program. About 47 million Americans received some level of nutrition assistance through food stamps last year. And a report by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities says the House bill will eliminate food assistance to nearly 2 million low-income people, mostly working families with children and older people. And the Senate bill makes it more difficult even for ex-convicts to get food stamps. A lifetime ban has also been extended to sex offenders and murderers. So GMO getting some attention, but what about this? This appears to amount, within the term Farm Bill, as one of the greatest cuts to the safety net since Clinton at a time of unprecedented need.
Well, the safety net is under attack across the board, but they've been zeroing in on food stamps, or the SNAP program, for years now. It's been a centerpiece of all of the different austerity bargains that have been struck, that have been attempted to be struck between the White House and Republicans. The difference, though, is huge: $20+ billion coming from the Republicans and $4 from Democrats, and a lot of that $4 is accounting gimmicks.
Does that get the Democrats off the hook, or they?
No, at a time like this, when there are still people hungry, and there's still people out of work, you would think you would be increasing the amount of food stamps. I mean, food stamps are extremely effective as stimulus. They pump money back into the economy. They're moral. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Feed the hungry is something that most people can get behind. And a lot of the money goes actually to agribusiness. Where do you think these people spend the money?
Right.
So they're propping up the same interests that are pushing for more agricultural subsidies.
And yet, Christopher Cook, there is this bipartisan support then to make the poorest pay in a bid to somehow save the economy. I mean, you've done some number crunching. I mean, what sort of impact first will this have, and will this even save any money in the long run?
Well, I mean, it's, maybe it'll save some money on one ledger while costing money on another. I mean, as I wrote about for the LA Times, there are very clear, strong economic and public health benefits that come out of food stamp spending. Emergency food aid is not the most ideal form of spending, but the reality is that this is a direct economic stimulus, as Ryan mentioned. $1 in food stamp money multiplies into about $1.72 in the economy, and every $1 billion of food stamp spending creates roughly 3,300 farm jobs for those farm state legislators listening, and again, excellent public health benefits that could be much better if we had better food access in poor neighborhoods, better supermarkets in poor neighborhoods, and if we also had better nutrition education, which is actually also being cut in the proposed budget from the House.
Tom Philpott, help us understand though how, as the Farm Bill was being drawn up in the committee stage then, despite actually the potential blowback to agribusiness then, there is this consensus that food stamps are the things that everyone needs to cut. Very quickly though, we only have about 30 seconds.
It used to be that there used to be a coalition of farm state people who supported food stamps in a deal with urban people who supported massive spending on farm subsidies, and that bolstered farm bills for years and years and years. And now you've got this Tea Party kind of right-wing smash the state faction coming in the House, and they're smashing up that old coalition. And so, there's actually a question: are we even going to get a farm bill? It's going to pass the Senate for sure, but we're not really sure if it's going to pass the House at all because of this right-wing faction that wants to slash food stamps and even farm programs.
All right, well, we'll keep an eye on it. Tom Philpott, thank you very much. Christopher Cook, thank you. Ryan Grimm, as always, thank you very much too. And that's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.